This is Asian Insider, and I'm Nirmal Ghosh. Now, US forces have killed Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the so-called caliph of the Islamic State. The question we address today is, what does that mean for Southeast Asia? Now, since July last year in the Philippines, ISIS has claimed 4 suicide bombings. In 2017, you will remember, the Philippines fought for 5 months in its toughest battle since World War II to retake the southern city of Marawi from militia claiming loyalty to ISIS. There was a huge death toll, almost 250 soldiers and civilians, 954 militants, and it left the town in ruins. Literally weeks ago in Western Java, Indonesia's chief security minister, Wiranto, was stabbed in an attack by a couple who apparently belong to the Jamaah Ansar-ud-Daulah, the JAD, that has pledged loyalty to ISIS. Wiranto survived. 22 people have been arrested. So while Jamaah Islamiyah and al-Qaeda are still very much active with cells in different countries across Asia, there are other groups as well, some of them opportunistically jumping on the Islamic State bandwagon. We have on the line Rakyan Adibrata, Country Director of IACSP Indonesia. That's the International Association for Counter-Terrorism and Security Professionals. Rakyan, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So Rakyan, how much influence does the Islamic State have among groups in Southeast Asia? Or is it a case of some groups being more interested in ISIS than the other way around?
Well, after the splits within the organization called the Jamaah Ansarut Tauhid, which established by Abu Bakr Bashir, one of the most prominent jihadists in Southeast Asia, who also established Jamaah Islamiyah in the past. In 2017, there is a bigger split out because most of the members doesn't agree to join the Jamaah, the what's so-called ISIS, and create their own organization called the Jamaah Ansar Sharia. But the 10% still agree to join the ISIS and pledge allegiance with ISIS, along with other organizations, which then create Jamaah Ansar Daulah. Now, this group have totally different characteristics compared with the Jamaah Islamiyah. They have ability to recruit more people comparing with Jamaah Islamiyah, and they grow quite in numbers, quite big comparing with Jamaah Islamiyah in the first 10 years of period between 2000 until 2010. Answering the questions, indeed, people have the tendency to join ISIS or pledge allegiance to ISIS comparing with the JI.
So will the demise of al-Baghdadi change anything in Southeast Asia? Or is there a possibility of JI and al-Qaeda gaining ground in Southeast Asia? And which countries are vulnerable?
Well, Indonesia plays a really important part in Southeast Asia because it's the biggest country and the biggest Muslim populations, not just only in Southeast Asia, but also in the world. Now, so if you take that as a number, of course, the numbers of the jihadists or the people who radicalize and trying to join any terrorist organization, whether it's JI or Jamaah Ansar Daulah, which pledge allegiance to ISIS, is growing even bigger comparing with other countries in Southeast Asia. The jihadist dynamics and narratives is always going to be stay in Indonesia for the next couple of decades. Now, whether it's going to be those who still pledge allegiance to ISIS or with Jamaah Islamiyah, but it's going to be always going to be people who are going to relate themselves with a terrorist organization. Now, after the death of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, I saw we monitor numbers of Telegram groups that belong or being controlled by ISIS Indonesians, ISIS supporters within the country, and in the first couple of days, they still in the self-denial, saying that it's just only a propaganda from the West that's saying that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, their leader, is dead. But now they start to accept the truth that indeed Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead. But now, what do they take after seeing the fact that their leader is dead? There is one narrative that being say that whether our leader is dead, the person that is going to replace him is already there, and there will be no vacuum of power. But on the other hand, what we're trying to focus here, especially in Indonesia, is to see the potentials of the terrorist attack go back to the previous targets. So there's in the first one, especially 5 years between 2000 until 2005, especially. Most target by the Jemaah Islamiyah are targeting a Western target, or what we called as the far enemies. But then it slightly changed, and it changed rapidly after 2010, targeting the near enemy, which is the police and the state, where the peak of the attack is attacking Wiranto a couple of weeks ago. But that's as part of their concept, or their main targets, where switching from the far enemy and to the near enemy, which is the state. But now, after the death of al-Baghdadi, there is a tendency that they will also going to target the West again. But it's not going to be as massive. From my point of view, it's not going to be as massive as the attack that conducted by the Jemaah Islamiyah in the past, using bombing tactics, so on and so forth. But mostly, what we're trying to prevent is the lone wolf attack or small cell attack, just using knife or car ramming, for instance.
Right. So, very quickly, you had a recent interesting development out there in Indonesia. Former National Police Chief Tito Karnavian, who was, one of the leaders in the fight, in the counterterrorism fight, he's now become Indonesia's Home Affairs Minister, and Police General Idham Aziz is taking over. Now, is this a good development?
Of course, I saw this is a good development. Pak Tito will play a really important role in controlling the Home Affairs. Numbers of things that going to be included under his portfolio is regarding on supervising or disbanding, if needed, to any organizations that leads to radicalizations or violent extremism context. On the other hand, Mr. Idham Aziz are well-known and prominent individuals who have extensive experience on homeland security, and also a really highly decorated police officers in the last few decades. So this is a good development, and we do really hope that with the moving of Pak Tito, Mr. Tito Karnavian, to a ministerial desk, he going to lead a better coordination within government entities to prevent not just only terrorism, but also preventing radicalizations before it changes into terrorism.
Thank you very much, Rakian. Much appreciated. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
So let's turn now to Wayudi Suryatmatia, the Straits Times Indonesia correspondent in Jakarta, and Raul Dancil, Philippines correspondent in Manila. Wayudi, thanks for being with us today. What is your assessment of the influence of ISIS in Indonesia?
Indonesia, the largest Muslim population in the world, and ISIS, they have been having this what they call Takfiri doctrine. They treat anyone as enemies, including Muslims who do not follow their doctrine. Unlike their predecessor, Jemaah Islamiyah, which focus on attacks primarily on Western interests. So that is one of the reasons why they're not that say popular among Muslims in Indonesia. If I can tell you more, compared to Jemaah Islamiyah, ISIS attacks have been small, poorly planned, unorganized. So we can call they are just newbie terrorists with lack of experience. They have picked up their skills to attack primarily from internet. And unlike Jemaah Islamiyah, they don't have people who have gone to battles in Afghanistan, in Mindanao. So if we can highlight some of their attacks, Jemaah Islamiyah had Bali bombing, where 200 people were killed. The second Bali bombing, 25 people were killed. Australian embassy bombing. ISIS, 4 people, 3 people, and even the central Jakarta attack, the gun that they used was actually stuck. They could have killed more if the gun worked properly.
Yeah. Okay. That was quite lucky, actually. But so, given this, I mean, from what you're telling me, it seems that the demise of al-Baghdadi will not really change much because a lot of these groups are autonomous in themselves, right?
There are a lot of lone wolves, and gauging from the chatter on the social media on the militants affiliated to the ISIS affiliated groups. Let me highlight or quote some of those to you, probably. They said, quote, "The global media has reported Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi has died in a raid by US forces. We should only trust the Islamic State newsletter. We should wait." And then they also said on the social media, if Baghdadi died, the ISIS newsletter would report it like they did when the ISIS spokesman Abu Muhammad al-Atmani died, and ISIS announced he was replaced by Ali Muhajir. So basically, they're saying a replacement of ISIS leader would confirm the demise of al-Baghdadi. And they also went on, if Baghdadi was killed, there will be a successor. Don't worry. So these are the chatters among the militants on the social media. So their violent jihad will continue regardless.
Very, very interesting. Okay, so Rahul, coming to you, coming to the Philippines, what is your take? Do you think al-Baghdadi's demise will resonate out there, will change anything there?
I agree with the assessment of security officials here that the Baghdadi's death, while a setback, will not diminish the threat of violent extremism here in the Philippines. I think one fact to look at here is that Baghdadi, in the eyes of his followers, Baghdadi died a martyr. And this is bound to galvanize younger, more idealistic terrorists here in the Philippines. I'd like to point out that here in the Philippines, we've had suicide attacks before, but they were perpetrated by foreigners, Indonesians. In the last bombing, we had a couple from Indonesia who bombed a cathedral here in southern Philippines. But in July, we saw the first case of a Filipino suicide bomber. And I think Baghdadi's death, the way it happened, he blew himself up. I understand. It's setting an example, for younger, more idealistic Filipino terrorists, and that may embolden them to, resort to more suicide attacks. And we've had an influx of foreign terrorists coming here, and they're the ones who are radicalizing these younger generation of Muslims. Before, the motivation, I think the motivation before with older generation of Islamist insurgents have been mostly financial, but we've had younger fighters here who have had more contacts with these veterans from the fighting in Afghanistan, in Syria and Iraq, and they're the ones indoctrinating these younger terrorists into a more militant form, more deadly form of, Islam, I guess, extremism, violent extremism. And so to sum it up, I think Baghdadi's death will just galvanize these terrorists and make them an even greater threat here in the Philippines.
Right, and I'm glad you pointed out the fact that, the returning fighters are a problem, the fighters coming back from Syria and that region to the various countries. So what happened in Marawi, it was a disaster, and it shocked everyone that it happened at that scale. Now, is the armed forces of the Philippines and the security agencies, are they more on top of things now, or is the Philippines still vulnerable?
No, Marawi dealt a severe, a setback, a big setback to ISIS linked groups here, and they're still trying to regroup. I don't think they're planning anything as big as Marawi right now. So right now we're seeing small attacks, bombing a military camp, attacking small civilian targets. The Islamists, the ISIS-linked groups, are incapable of mounting another attack in the scale of Marawi. The setback has been because they lost their charismatic leaders, many of their charismatic leaders who have pledged allegiance to ISIS in Marawi, and so that's I'll give that to the military. But I think the bigger factor now is that recently the government formed this autonomous Muslim region here in Mindanao. The idea, and this region is composed of former Islamic fighters, no? And the idea behind this is that, rather than use the military to hunt down these extremists, you have this semi-autonomous government governed by former Islamist fighters, Muslim,
right,
who will deal with the problem themselves. If this succeeds, the experiment is that the goal is that if this experiment succeeds, this government of Muslim will bring prosperity to a region hobbled by poverty, and the insurgency, the Muslim insurgency here, the root of the problem has always been poverty. Poverty stokes insurgency, Muslim insurgency here. So the idea is that if you have this region, if this semi-autonomous government that can bring prosperity to Mindanao, it will make violent extremism less attractive, to Muslims. And so everything is now. I think victory over violent extremism will hinge more on this experiment than on any military campaign.
Well, Rahul and Bayudi, thank you very much for joining us today. It's very grateful. That was great. Well, here in the United States, General Kenneth McKenzie, commander of the U.S. Central Command, or CENTCOM, has been quite frank that nobody is under any illusions. We don't see a bloodless future, he said, because al-Baghdadi will be replaced and that ideology is still out there. For Asian Insider, I'm Nirmal Ghosh.